always at the stick. From who's got it better than us to brick by brick. It's always the 49ers way, from offseason to game day. Yeah, we talk back. It's the 49ers Cutback.
It's 49ers Cutback podcast time. Welcome to the show, everyone. And it's time to talk about the first domino falling for the San Francisco 49ers this offseason. And we talked about it a little bit in the last episode that the 49ers were going to evaluate. They were going to take a deep dive into the players, the coaching staff, the way that they do things, and that ultimately decisions were going to come. And I think everyone was kind of expecting this decision to be made, and that is that special teams coordinator Brian Schneider has been relieved of his duties, according to Nick Wagner of ESPN. And it's been, of course, confirmed by Adam Schefter and others from the sources that they've talked to. No official announcement from the 49ers yet. Kyle Shanahan had told Matt Mayoko that he planned on speaking to the media later this week. Lots of decisions still to be made. And Brian Schneider is the first decision that was made for Kyle Shanahan. And I don't think this one was a tough decision. Brian Schneider came to the 49ers with a emphasis on really taking this defense or the special teams to a new level after Richie Hightower had struggled so much with the special teams in San Francisco. And you bring in a guy who had so much success in his time in Seattle when they had the Legion of Boom in that era, and a guy that Kyle Shanahan had experience with when they were at UCLA together. So this was a guy he felt comfortable with, a guy with a proven track record that he expected to be able to turn this program around in San Francisco. So that's why he turned over the reins to Brian Schneider. From the beginning, it appeared that the 49ers were going all in as well to give Brian Schneider the necessary tools to be able to turn this special teams around. Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch were not going to allow the third of the team, the special teams, to be their downfall. They had just come off a really tough 2021 season that saw Richie Hightower special teams create a lot of mistakes, a lot of problems, and so they knew they needed to move forward and needed to add some necessary players to do so. They brought in a new kick and punt returner in McLeod. They brought in George Odom. They brought in Oren Burks, all special teams aces. So with Ray McLeod and Odom and Oren Burks, they really felt like they had an opportunity to turn the special teams around when they already had really good special teams players like Demetrius Flanagan-Fowles that were on their roster. And the 49ers thought Brian Schneider was the guy to get it done. And I guess if you really look at it, it seemed like he should have been. With the things that the people said in Seattle about who he was and how good of a coach he was, it just made sense that he would come to San Francisco and reestablish the 49ers special teams as a very good unit, and really a special teams unit that hasn't been good since Jim Harbaugh was in town. That's really the last time that the 49ers had a very good special teams, and they've got to get back there. So they're moving on from Brian Schneider, and we're going to be talking about who could potentially step in as possible names, and it's a little bit difficult to find special teams coordinators available, but sometimes you can. So we're going to talk about some of those names. We're also going to talk a little bit more about Schneider and Kyle Shanahan and really who is the problem. Please like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. I really appreciate it. If you're listening on audio platform, 49ers Cutback on Believe Network, please give it a 5-star rating. And if you're going to bet, especially with the playoffs coming, bet with Bet Online. Bet Online continues to be the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for online betting in 2025. Whether you're a seasoned fan or a first-time bettor, Bet Online is your ultimate game day companion. The largest selection of odds on everything from football, the NBA, college basketball, to NHL and UFC, Bet Online is the number one source for sports betting for the new year. From touchdowns to three-pointers and hat tricks, Bet Online has you covered on every game, every play, and every win. Bet Online, the game starts here. So, Brian Schneider, we knew, was probably going to be the first domino to fall, and that's exactly what happened. There's going to be more dominoes that come, and so we'll kind of go through that a little bit as well. as the 49ers progress through the offseason, there's going to be certain stages. We talked about step one was evaluating coaches and making coaching adjustments. And I think Brian Schneider's the first one to go. But with that comes a conversation. Is now we've seen two failed special team coaches for Kyle Shanahan. We've seen the emphasis signing players, drafting punters, drafting a kicker high, trying to put a lot of capital, whether that's draft or financial, with McLeod and Odom and Burks, is they've continually tried to pour money into helping these special teams coordinators have the best possible special teams. And we all know that injuries can play a big part. If all of a sudden one of your special teams ace is a starting linebacker, like what happened in 2023 with Oren Burks, then yeah, he plays less special teams, which means you are diminished when it comes to your special teams unit. But really, we never saw a consistent improvement. We never saw players that went from being very bad special teams players to very good special teams players would show that there was a good coach that was developing these players. And I had a lot of high hopes for Brian Schneider, especially from all the things I had heard from the Seattle organization and the people there about how well thought of Brian Schneider was and what he could produce. But now he's out the door. But it brings up the question, with two failed special teams coordinators, is this a special teams coordinator issue or is this a Kyle Shanahan issue? And part of the reason that you say that and have to answer this question is because either they are struggling because they are just not good coaches, which then would imply that Kyle Shanahan can't evaluate special teams coaches when he's going through his hiring process and bring someone in that is going to be good for the special teams. Or it's a situation where they're not giving these guys enough resources, enough time, and enough ability to do a good job as special teams coordinators. I don't think it's the latter for sure, because I haven't seen really Richie Hightower go do a great job in Chicago. He's continued to be somewhat mediocre when it comes to their special teams level. So I don't think it's that, just looking at the proof in the pudding. So it's probably the fact that the 49ers, Kyle Shanahan, maybe didn't pick great special teams coaches. We know he had a previous relationship with Richie Hightower. They knew each other from college. He felt comfortable with him, and Hightower was thought of well in the league. And then you look at Brian Schneider, and he comes with a proven track record. And I'm feeling like Kyle thought he was getting himself a very established and a very good special teams coach that was going to take over. But Kyle absolutely has to knock this special teams coordinator job out of the park. He has to go find a guy that's going to make 1/3 of the 49ers team a lot better than it's been. 31st best in DVOA in 2024 is a detriment to your football team. We've heard the phrase complementary football, and that's offense, defense, and special teams playing together. And when one lets you down, it can really hurt your football team. And we saw the special teams for the 49ers consistently let them down this year. Fake punts, blocked field goals, all kinds of situations where the 49ers just weren't executing on special teams, missed tackles. It's all been a little bit of a struggle. And then I think another thing that unfortunately Brian Schneider has to wear the cap of is right now Jake Moody is a definite thought that he's probably going to be out the door at some point. Now, I believe that it's likely that the 49ers bring in competition and make Jake Moody compete during training camp. I wonder how much the 49ers put stock into Jake Moody after the injury, how much they put stock into Jake Moody with a different holder. Because if you're a part of Twitter, you've seen some of the new conversation going around about Pat O'Donnell's holding of the ball for Jake Moody. And that's been something that's been very interesting, is how much has the hold been a detriment to Jake Moody. And I don't think it's the whole thing, but it might give the 49ers at least a opportunity to put Jake Moody back out there for training camp and preseason and have him compete with another kicker that they bring in. I think that is the most likely. But Brian Schneider's the one that worked out the kickers in that draft. When the 49ers had decided they were going to move on from Robbie Gould, they decided that because they wanted a different type of kickoff. Of course, they didn't know the kickoff rules were going to change this drastically, but they wanted a different kickoff. They wanted hang time. They wanted somebody with a strong leg that could put it inside the 5-yard line directionally with a little bit of hang time to limit the effect of a good kick returner. And of course, we know that rule changed. Jake Moody was never really effective in that area, but also he hasn't been as consistent with his accuracy kicking field goals. And Brian Schneider's the one who signed off on Jake Moody. He's the one that went and worked him out and felt like this was the next great kicker in the NFL. Enough so that the 49ers felt they needed to pull the trigger with a third-round comp pick to take Jake Moody. So, right, wrong, or indifferent, this is going to be hung on Brian Schneider 100%. And he's going out the door unceremoniously and with the thought that he picked the wrong kicker. So, the 49ers are moving on from Brian Schneider. And what does that mean for their search? Well, Kyle Shanahan's got to get somebody, and he's got to get somebody that he feels comfortable can do the job. So I went ahead and went through some potential special teams coordinators that could step in and fill the 49ers role. And it's always interesting because you can't really make lateral moves in the NFL unless a team is willing to let you out of your contract. So for the most part, it must be a spot where there's a head coach vacancy. When there's a head coach vacancy, then the assistant coaches can a lot of times move on to another organization. And I think that is usually the case when a new head coach comes in. You have a conversation, you decide you want to go a different direction. Most of the time, they will go ahead and let you out of your contract and you can move on. So those are the options that I was really looking for. Head coach gone, what special teams coordinator could be available for the 49ers? And I found some very interesting candidates, and I think the 49ers need to get a very strong candidate. It doesn't mean they have to have a lot of experience like Brian Schneider. They could have less experience as long as they've been really exciting and invigorating, and is a guy that the 49ers would definitely want. So the first name I came up with was a guy from the Jets, and we know that they are going to have a coaching change there. Jeff Ulbrich had taken over as interim head coach for Robert Saleh, but they've got a guy that's been there for a while, and that's Brant Boyer, and he's seen the special teams consistently get better since 2017. I think he's done a very good job, enough so that when Robert Saleh got there in 2021, he decided to keep Brant Boyer. Now, that's going to be the interesting part of this thing. Brant Boyer has been through a couple of head coaches now, and he's decided to stay in New York. So will the 49ers ultimately be able to lure somebody away from New York into a different setting? Well, maybe his family's older now. He's ready to move on and potentially come to the West Coast. That could be something that they look for. But I think Kyle Shanahan definitely should call Brant Boyer. This is a guy that's consistently been good when it comes to special teams, even when it comes to a bad football team. So I think that the 49ers might look to go that direction. And with there being an open spot with a head coach, there's a potential, especially since he has been a couple coaches removed, that he could be available. So that would be number one. Number two is the Saints' Darren Rizzi. And you probably have seen a lot of Darren Rizzi because he became the interim head coach when they fired Dennis Allen. So Rizzi took over, and you could see the fire, you could see the intensity, and you saw a special teams unit from the Saints that was very inspired and made a lot of plays down the stretch for that football team. I think this would be a great addition to the 49ers because it really has felt, and this was with Hightower and with Brian Schneider, that there was no real energy with these special teams. And I'd like to see that group get some energy and get back to being a team that forces the action and makes things happen on special teams, makes big tackles that you could feed off of when it comes to energy, makes key turnovers, gets blocks, is aggressive when it comes to fake punts and opportunities to find things happen. And I think that's going to be a little bit of the shift for Kyle Shanahan, is he needs to kind of allow that special teams coordinator to put on the gas. And that's why I really like Darren Rizzi. He's proven that he's a leader of men. You could put him in charge of special teams and you wouldn't have to worry about it at all because he's proven that he can actually run a football team with what he did with the Saints. It wasn't perfect, but when he stepped in, you could definitely see a change and the way that the team responded to him. So I think Darren Rizzi would make a lot of sense for the 49ers as special teams coordinator. The Patriots moved on from Gerard Mayo, which could open the door for the 49ers to go for a young name in Jeremy Springer. Jeremy Springer was with the Rams for a while, so he comes from the McVay system, and this year he went to the Patriots as their special teams coordinator. He's a young, upcoming coach, and this is one of those other opportunities where it's a guy that could step in and have a fresh view of special teams. That's why I said it's not just about the veterans, but why not take a look at a guy that, as long as the team is responding well to him and the special teams is playing well, that has some fresh ideas, some new takes on special teams in the NFL. I think that this would be another one the 49ers should think about going to. Now, if the Patriots sign a guy like Mike Vrabel to be their head coach, there's a potential that he might want to keep Jeremy Springer in New England and they could work something out. But Kyle Shanahan has an opportunity. He's already fired Brian Schneider. He could reach out and try to get these guys to come before they hire a head coach, and that way he can go ahead and get one of his key guys. So I think you're looking at a couple of guys that are in different stages. You look at the first two guys I talked about, and those guys are veterans who've done it for a while and are a proven commodity, which might make a lot of fans more comfortable with who they are. But then you've got the fresh face, the Jeremy Springer, the guy who definitely could be a guy you like. And, one thing interesting about him is, some of the players were complaining about the New England fans booing them down the stretch. And he stepped up and said, hey, when you win like you win in New England, you need to make sure that you don't worry about those fans, because those fans, they're giving you a certain expectation for winning. That sounds like something that the 49ers could definitely, get around, and he would definitely come from the right mindset. So I like Jeremy Springer potentially as a special teams coordinator. And then a guy, I don't know if he's going to be available, but every single time that I see his name, I think he would be the perfect fit for the 49ers special teams, because I love the way he handles every special teams unit he's ever been a part of. I love his aggressive style. I love the fact that they're always on their P's and Q's, and they're always making plays, whether the team is good or not. Their special teams unit is always good, and that is the Cowboys' John Fossil. And I know that right now he's under contract. Mike McCarthy has been asked to interview for Chicago. The Dallas Cowboys have yet to give permission to do so. But John Fossil is the ultimate candidate. The way that the 49ers reached out to Kansas City about trading for Spagnuolo last year, their defensive coordinator, that's how I feel about John Fossil. Now, I'm not saying go out and trade for him. You probably could. Dallas might be willing to trade John Fossil. But if he was available, that would be a dynamite pick. So Fossil comes with a lot of acclaim, a guy that's well thought of around the league, who always has good special teams, and I think somebody that you could kind of turn special teams over to. And I think that's important for Kyle Shanahan. Get strong personality on special teams that can run the show. You need somebody that can go out there that's energetic, that's intense, that's going to always make sure his guys are consistently where they're supposed to be, and that he's going to be definite on his decisions. And I think that's what they have. They had a real passive special teams coordinator right now with Brian Schneider. I think he's been a good coach in the league. Didn't work out in San Francisco, and I think they need a more intense makeup when it comes to their special teams coach. That's why I talked about some of the guys I talked about, especially John Fossil and Darren Rizzi, who are very intense, and I like those guys. So to me, those are some guys that potentially the 49ers could go to with Brian Schneider, but it could be anybody. It could be somebody from college football. It could be somebody that was a coordinator at some other point, or even a position coach. We'll find out just some of the names that I think could be in the mix. Now, another coach, and I brought this up on the Ant Hill show. It's available over on Patreon. I talked about the fact that Brian Griese is likely to be gone. And the reason that I said that is quarterback coach Brian Griese has been getting a lot of outside interest, especially from college teams, wanting him to either be the head coach or the offensive coordinator. And so that is a step up for him, because in San Francisco, he's a really good quarterback coach. We all love what he did with Brock Purdy and the fact that he continues to develop guys like Sam Darnold. He worked very good this year on Josh Dobbs and Brandon Allen. Even Brandon Allen looks better than he did in Cincinnati. So I think we've seen him be able to do his position really well. With that, you want to have growth, especially if you want to stay inside the industry. There's not that many guys who want to stay where they're at. There's not very many Chris Kacereks who just wants to be a D-line coach, or Bobby Turner who just wants to be a running back coach. Usually you have guys that have thoughts of moving up, doing something different. And I think Brian Griese wants to. So I think that there's a likelihood he could be on his way out. And something interesting, the New York Football Jets have actually asked for permission to interview Brian Griese for their vacant head coaching job. Now, with that being said, do I think that he's a legitimate option for the Jets as a head coach? No. But a lot of times when teams are deciding what they're going to do at head coach, the head coaches that come in a lot of times or for interviews will say, hey, I would love to have a guy like Brian Griese as my offensive coordinator. I've talked to Brian Griese and he would be coming with me. And so what happens is you interview them for the head coaching job. So that way you can get a real good feel of who they are as a person, who they would be as a coordinator. And that way you can kind of sign off on it. But it's a way of you interviewing them before they ever really come with a incoming head coach. So if they're making a decision there, that could be what it is. Brian Griese might end up being the offensive coordinator for the Jets. Now, it doesn't mean that it's going to happen this season, but I think it's very likely. I think he's looking to improve, to get a different position, and maybe that's going to happen this season. So, Brian Griese interviewing for the New York Jets vacant head coaching job, and that is likely the first of many opportunities for him to move on, and I think he does move on this offseason, which would, disappoint a lot of 49er fans. I think we've all grown accustomed to how good he's done as a quarterback coach. Next up, the 49ers have yet to move on from Nick Sorensen, and I think that is the next decision that needs to be made, is whether you're going to keep Nick Sorensen and Brandon Staley in that current battery along the defense as far as the CEOs of the defense. And I think Kyle Shanahan's got a real tough decision to make there. And I think this one's a little bit more nuanced. I think with Brian Schneider, you knew you had to move on no matter what. I think with Nick Sorensen, you will move on if you have a better option. If you don't, then you'll stand pat and not upset the apple cart and potentially upset some players as well. Because when you make this defensive coordinator move, this needs to be a lockdown, big-time move that's going to keep your defense under wraps for the next 2 years. It's got to make sure it is a long-term solution, because the 49ers would be going into 4 defensive coordinators in 4 years. So it has to be a good decision for Kyle Shanahan. And if you're going to make wholesale changes at the coordinator position, special teams and defense, you have to make sure you knock it out of the park. I don't think they have a coach inside the organization that they would want to go to right away. I think they have coaches that they really like, that I think Kyle probably believes in a couple of years could be ready to be defensive coordinators for his team. I don't think they believe that now. So it's Nick Sorensen or someone who's available. Now, I do believe some of the names that have started to become available are going to make it very enticing for Kyle Shanahan to try to make a decision and say, you know what, Sorensen, I like you, but these guys are guys that are better. And of course, he's not going to say that, right? He's going to have to move on and then go ahead and grab one of these guys. And I think he's going to want to have conversations with them to make sure he could bring someone in. You don't want to just fire Nick Sorensen and not have a defensive coordinator ready to roll, because you just don't know what you would end up with. If you fire Nick Sorensen and all of a sudden you don't have one of those guys capable and available, then you're kind of in a rough patch. So I think Kyle is taking a look at the other coaches available, and there are some really talented defensive coordinators available if he decides to move on from Nick Sorensen, which I think most of the fan base believes Kyle Shanahan should do. I think still, like, I said on the Ant Hill show, I think it's like a 40-60, 30-70 that Nick Sorensen's going to be back, because it was only one season. If it had been 2 seasons of Nick Sorensen, I do think it would have been more like Brian Schneider, where we would believe he's for sure out. And we might get word here in the next just a little bit that he's going to be out as defensive coordinator. But the talented candidates start with Robert Saleh. I know a lot of people have been really on this train that Robert Saleh needs to be the next defensive coordinator for the San Francisco 49ers. I don't think that's going to be the case. Number one, I don't think Robert Saleh wants to come back to San Francisco, not because he dislikes Kyle Shanahan or the team or the organization, but this is kind of taking a step back. Going back to where you were doesn't really help you become a head coach again, because if you put yourself back in the same situation, you have the same success, it doesn't exactly prove that you're going to be a good head coach again. So I think he needs a fresh environment and a fresh place to go prove he can be the guy who can stand on his own 2 feet. With that being said, I'm not sure Kyle Shanahan, even though he loves Robert Saleh, he loves the intensity, how he runs the defense, and the players would absolutely love having him back. I think Kyle Shanahan also knows that this defense has changed and evolved immensely since Robert Saleh was here in 2020. DeMeco Ryans took this defense to a whole other level in 2021 and 2022. And I think that that's what they're ultimately trying to get back to, is an elite defense who's aggressive, who puts a lot of pressure on the opposing football team. And Robert Saleh was kind of a very vanilla, very basic defensive coordinator. It worked. That's what the 49ers were known for. But I just think Kyle Shanahan feels like this league is evolving. So I think Robert Saleh, if he interviewed for the job, would have to convince Kyle that his defense would evolve. And I think that would be a big sticking point. But I ultimately think Robert Saleh or Kyle Shanahan want this reunion. It's not like they don't love each other. It's not that it wasn't great when he was here, because it was. I just think that they both need to go in different directions. So who else is available? Well, first off, Robert Saleh's former defensive coordinator and former interim head coach of the New York Jets, Jeff Ulbrich, former 49er linebacker, and somebody that we know Kyle Shanahan has a lot of respect for. That's for sure. He's proven he can run the system in New York. So I think that makes sense. Playing for the 49ers makes it easy. He's from the Bay Area, makes it even easier. So I think that Jeff Ulbrich makes a lot of sense for the 49ers. He's talked about the fact he respects Kyle Shanahan's knowledge, football knowledge, so much. I think those two would work it out. I don't know if he's the best candidate for the job, and a lot of people are saying he is. I like him. I think if Kyle Shanahan decided to go with Jeff Ulbrich, I would feel like he thought it was an upgrade over Nick Sorensen, and I would ultimately be okay with it. But ultimately, I think that there's some really enticing names out there still. One of those, former Saints head coach Dennis Allen. And I know Dennis Allen now is thought of as a failed head coach, but you know who else was thought of as a failed head coach was Steve Spagnuolo with the Kansas City Chiefs. Dennis Allen has put together some very good defensive units throughout his tenure in the NFL as a defensive coordinator. He's not a failed defensive coordinator. He's just been a failed head coach. And that's okay, because those guys you put in place and they don't really have the opportunity to become head coaches as much. So I think this is an opportunity for the 49ers if they wanted to go get a guy that's definitely, a very great, talented veteran defensive coordinator. Dennis Allen could be a potential coach. Now, with all things, they have to fit into what Kyle Shanahan wants to do. And there's been a lot of remarks about whether the 49ers should stick with the wide nine or not. I think the team is built with the players they have for the wide nine. Ultimately, I think they will stick with it. Maybe they find somebody to hybrid. Sometimes you run it, sometimes you don't. That could be a nice adjustment. But I think Dennis Allen would be a nice option for the 49ers. And one more to throw out there is former Cincinnati Bengals defensive coordinator Lou Anarumo. He's going to be available. And Anarumo has been a very good coach in this league for a while. And, when they are right, they are impressive. And they play in a tough AFC North where running the football is a key. And his Bengals defense has been able to slow down the run and not really have great talent. I mean, think when you look at their team, you have Trey Hendrickson and you've had guys come and go. But as far as great talent, they haven't had. What would he do with the 49ers defensive talent? I think that's a big question. But I think another guy that you feel confident with, and that's what we're doing. We're finding guys you feel confident with that you could put them over there. They're already going to understand what they're supposed to do. They've been defensive coordinators. They don't need somebody to walk them through it. Kyle can leave the defense to them, and they can take care of business. And I think that's what you're looking at. So another very talented guy that they could possibly bring. Now, a couple of contract things before we end the show. Brock Purdy contract negotiations. Brock had some very interesting comments, and we've been talking about this. Mark Adams for 49ers Web Zone and 49ers Camelot, he's been saying he expects the Brock Purdy deal to get done very quickly, a la what they did with Jimmy Garoppolo back in 2018, and just get that deal done right away. And Brock had this to say. He said, everybody's different just with the timing of getting something done and whatnot. For me, I want to obviously get it done. If that's an opportunity to be able to get it done quick, that'd be great. Just so we can get back for phase one and go after it. It's with the receivers and our team and just continue to grow, because we've got to grow together. So this is that part of Brock Purdy that everyone loves. The guy that wants to get out there, get everything together, and get this team in the right situation to be successful. And he knows getting out there for phase one in OTAs, a healthy Brock Purdy getting out there, but also a rested football team that'll be excited to get out there at the beginning. And that's exactly what he is. He's definitely focused on moving forward, getting past the 2024 season and getting into 2025. He says we've got to come close and learn and just be the best versions of ourselves as fast as we can. And phase one, in my mind, of OTAs, coming back, getting all the guys back, and let's roll. Let's go after this off season together. But with that being said, everybody's timing is a little bit different and stuff. But for me, at the end of the day, I want to win. I want to win for this organization and everyone here. I'm not the kind of guy that wants to have any kind of drama associated with anything. I'm here for this organization, for my teammates in the locker room, and I want to be very professional about it. And I expected him to handle it professionally. That's 100% sure. So I'm not really concerned about Brock Purdy and the contract negotiations. I think if they are close on money, they're going to get this thing done in an expedited fashion, and Brock Purdy will be available. And imagine that. If he's ready for phase 1 of OTAs, you're talking March 12th. You're talking the beginning of the season. The new league year starts March 12th. And so you're talking about getting something done before that, maybe a little bit after OTAs, not too long after, getting everything in order, because you've got to make decisions in free agency. You guys to bring back, or guys that could potentially moving on, as we've kind of heard a couple of statements. And I know Brock is probably going to be back and get his contract, and I love his mindset. But it looks like Charvarius Ward's not, and I think a lot of people, when they heard the Domino Lenore contract extension, knew Charvarius Ward was likely to not come back. But his recent statements about the trauma that California brings, and the fact that when he's here, it's a little bit triggering after the death of his daughter. I think it puts real life into perspective. And so it's less about football. He talked about how he loves the 49ers organization and his teammates, but a change of scenery might be what he needs, especially since he said, his girl doesn't even want to come here because of the trauma. So he's staying there alone, and that's really tough. And so I do think we've seen the last of Charvarius Ward in San Francisco. I would like to, definitely say we enjoyed every moment of Charvarius Ward here. He's been one of my favorite characters on the football team, and overall great guy. He was very nice to my wife at training camp, signing, things for her and just interacting with her about our nephew. I think that Charvarius Ward is just a really stand-up guy, and that hurts seeing guys like that leave. But under the circumstances, he has to do what's right for him. He has to do what's right for his family. And, ultimately, that's what you want to see from these guys. I'm going to always root for Charvarius Ward because of the type of human being he is, but also he's a really good football player too. So unfortunately, Charvarius Ward has probably played his last game in Santa Clara, and the 49ers are ready to roll with Domino Lenore. They're ready to roll with Renardo Green, and they'll probably go ahead and address cornerback again in the draft, which they've started to hit on over the last several years, which is good news. The other one that definitely has started catching people by surprise all over social media is Sydney Warner has posted a TikTok of Dre Greenlaw's lady, and just the going away party that they had for 57. At least that's how they're approaching it, as Dre Greenlaw might not be back in San Francisco. Now, we know he's expressed his willingness to come back, wanting to come back. The organization wants Dre Greenlaw back. But we've seen Azeez Al-Shire go out and get, $10 million on the open market. Can the 49ers afford to pay Dre Greenlaw double digits coming off an Achilles injury? That's going to be the big question. I think the 49ers are going to do everything they can to sign Dre Greenlaw. They're going to get creative with the finances. But I think that a lot of people are seeing the writing on the wall that there could be players that could go a different direction. And I think that they're just preparing for this just in case he goes somewhere else. I think they would have a very big celebration if he gets a new contract. So hopefully Dre Greenlaw is able to come back. But I think you're starting to see that there's a potential that some key players for the 49ers over this stretch run could be on their way out. And that's really unfortunate. I like to say, thanks everyone for watching. Please like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. I really appreciate it. If you're listening on audio platform, 49ers Cutback on Believe Network, please give it a 5-star rating. And of course, this episode is brought to you by Bet Online. The game starts here. I'll catch you guys in the next one. Until then, stay safe. Remember, the right way is always the 49ers way.